Today we're going to be talking about improving foundation data in your ServiceNow. My name is Pekka Korpi. I'm the CEO of Qualdatrix. Qualdatrix is the name of the company that does a product called Data Content Manager, which we're going to be looking at later today. We're going to be talking about a little bit about what foundation data actually is and why you should take care of it. And of course, I'll show you a couple of example data models. And then we're going to use Data Content Manager to look at how you can actually improve it. So with me today, I have Mikko Juola. Handing it over to you, Mikko.
Hello. So my name is Mikko Juola. I'm the product owner for Data Content Manager and discussing about foundation data with Pekka today.
So let's kick it off. So Mikko, what is foundation data?
Well, that's a good question. In ServiceNow environment, it basically means all the background data related to users, groups, locations, company structures. And it's usually the kind of critical reference data you have in the background related to all of your processes and configuration items also. So it's the fundamental common data elements shared between different processes and workflows. Some consider configuration items also as foundation data, because it's kind of common reference data as well. Okay,
so now that everybody is talking about CSDM, how do these things relate?
Well, in CSDM, as you saw on the slides, they have now included foundation data, and it's considered as one of the domains. So foundation data is one of the CSDM domains, and it represents the critical referential data in CSDM. If we look at the model as a whole, we see that the foundation data is there or at the bottom, and it doesn't really make sense to draw it with relationships in the model because it relates to everything. So all the different CI classes, business application services, they all relate to foundation data and would have a lot of links.
How does it work in practice? I mean, everything relates to foundation data. Can you show me an example?
Sure thing. So let's look at one example from the CSDM or business applications class. So here you see the standard business application form view, and the highlighted attributes are all references to foundation data. So there are business processes, models, departments, users, and groups.
Okay, I see. So you can't really think about foundation data as a separate thing. It's kind of embedded into everything. It seems like we look at the form and half of it is actually foundation data when you're not really thinking about it as necessarily being it.
Indeed. And again, in the CSDM model, where they define the implementation phases, in the third version of the CSDM, they had 4 phases starting with crawl and ending up flying. But in the CSDM 4.0, they added like a 0 phase in the beginning called foundation. So
right.
You kind of need to do this before you can really utilize any of the ServiceNow products.
So basically they're saying that you can't build a very good house without a solid foundation, right?
Indeed, yeah. And if we take another example, so this one was from CMDB, but if we look at the ITSM product family and incident management form, here we see the incident form, including references to caller and assigned to as users, and then assignment group. So these are again references to foundation data. And it looks, or it doesn't look much here, but if we open up the form and take a look at the references or data behind these references, we see, for example, that on a service offering, you have plenty of foundation data references related to users and groups. On the caller, you have references to company structures, manager, and possibly other foundation data as well.
Okay, and again, it's the same thing that it's kind of embedded into everything, so you can't really differentiate foundation data as being like a separate thing. It's really the foundation, as you said, with references and links to everything.
It really is, and it really makes a big difference if you have this kind of reference data that you use on the form compared to like free text fields, for example.
Right.
So of course you could have an incident form or a business application where you say that, okay, Pekka Korpi is the owner of the application, but if that doesn't refer to a user, it's just free text, then you can't really use it for reporting or anything else.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I'm sure you have thought about some use cases where foundation data is exceptionally important, or maybe something that the use case can't live without.
Definitely. And there's so many use cases for foundation data because it's used throughout the platform everywhere. But here we've listed a few. So starting with reporting, if you think about the incident example, it refers to users and groups. So for example, the caller is a user. Through the user, you know what's the company or department. So easy to get reporting based on organizational structures. And that really goes through the whole platform. Everything you need to report, you rely on foundation data.
Right. So I guess thinking about the other way around, if your foundation data is not good enough, your reporting is not going to be very good either.
Indeed, yes. And the same applies to auto assignments. You can't really do that without proper foundation data. And what I mean by foundation or auto assignments here is that if you have incident, for example, you relate that to a service or a configuration item, you probably get the assignment group through the service or CI. So you can use that to assign the ticket to a correct group. Or maybe you have some on-site support requests and you want to assign those to the local on-site support group. So you need to know the location of the requester.
Right.
The third example is about approvals, and that we'll talk more a little bit later. But that, of course, relies heavily on foundation data as well. And then the last example listed here, the service subscriptions. With the service subscriptions, for example, you can have a more automated service portal where you already know which services are related to the current user and then relate your tickets to those services only, etc.
Right. Okay. So you were going to talk about approvals, I think it was, in more detail, right?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about approvals. So so talking about approvals, here you see a very simple workflows. It relates to the request approval. So for example, we have a request to get a new laptop, and you can do that from the portal. So if the laptop costs more than 1,000 euros, then you need an approval from the head of department. And if it's less than 1,000, then the line manager can do the approval for you. So if we think about the data that's required behind this workflow, you first of all need to have the requester, and that's the like one user record in your ServiceNow.
Mm-hmm.
If the approval is required from the manager, you need to know who is the manager of that user. So now we have a relationship between two user records. And then if it goes to the department approval, the user needs to belong to a department, and then that department needs to have a head of defined.
Right. So basically, if any of this information is missing, it's not going to work.
Yeah, the approval will fail one way or another. And that, of course, depends on how the approval flow is actually configured. Maybe in a worst case, the approval is just skipped and the process moves on without approval, or then it gets stuck. So somebody has to manually find the correct approval or approver or do some other extra tasks to continue.
Right. But in any case, it's not going to work. And it's going to cause some sort of manual work, most likely, or an approval without an approval happening. That sounds like money potentially going down the drain. But yeah, I can see that happening.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of this rule of 10, which says that if you have bad input data, your regular tasks take 10 times more to complete. So if you're supposed to do an approval automatically and then somebody needs to manually start finding people, then it definitely takes more time.
Okay. So it's really beginning to make sense to me. So I think I understand a little bit better what foundation data now is, and also the approval example is a very concrete one. So are you going to then show us what to do about this? How do you get this data into shape? It's obviously important.
Yeah, let's use this approval example to show how a data content manager can help you maintain data and make sure that you have all these required relationships in place. So if we switch over to the demo.
Okay, so this is Data Content Manager that we're looking at, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so Data Content Manager is our product. It's a ServiceNow certified app, and we built it to improve any data on the platform. And now, Mikko, you're going to show us an example of how to improve your foundation data, right?
Yeah, and the idea is that we first create a blueprint that defines the requirements for a particular use case or part of your platform. Then we run audits against the blueprint to see how compliant we are with the requirements. And then we could use the content planner to maintain data according to the model. And the workspace refers to task creation capabilities. So we can create tickets based on the audit messages.
Right, but it all begins with the blueprint.
Yes. So let's create a blueprint. And this time we'll start from scratch, but you can also use one of the templates we've defined. So we have plenty of templates related to CSDM. But let's create a user, or let's call it approval data model. And here in the Blueprint Designer, you have all your tables or classes on the right, and we can search for the user table. And then we just drag it to the canvas. And the first table you track here will get this R symbol. It means that it's the root class. So that's where the data model starts. Then let's add another class so we can link the original requester to the manager. So we'll make it a mandatory link. And then we need to know the department. And the manager or head of for the department. So I'll just define how these tables relate to each other using the references that are available on these different tables. So simply drawing lines between the classes will define our requirements.
So basically, you've now created a data model about the approval workflow, and you're basically just dragging and dropping things onto a canvas and drawing lines in between, and that defines your data model.
Exactly.
So there's no scripting or anything like that involved.
No scripting or anything like that. The only thing you need to do if you want to be a little bit more specific on the model is that you can define different conditions. So here, for example, if we have the manager and we want to make sure that the manager is an active user in the system, we can add a target record condition saying that the user record must be active. And then we can do the same for department and the department head if we have some specific requirements related to those records. But already with this blueprint, we can run audits and see what our data looks like. So we have to publish this in order to run audits. Okay, so now we have a blueprint published and we can go and run an audit. So usually you should schedule the audits and run them, for example, once a week. But first you might want to do an on-demand audit to check that the blueprint is created correctly and you're getting kind of expected results. Approval data model, and we're still testing. So now we can define the scope for the audit. We could include, for example, only the active user records. But here I want to make just a very quick sample audit. So I'll also connect the scope to a company. So let's say contains Acme. So we'll have around 500 users. Then I'll click start. And now the audit engine will start to crawl through those records and compare the users to the blueprint and all the requirements defined in a blueprint. Okay, our audit is now complete and we can take a look at the results. So on this overview, we see that 4% of the user records have some critical deviations, basically meaning that they are missing either the manager or a department. And then 94% are fully compliant with the model. So all the references are in place and the manager is an active user. And then these 2% mean that there's something wrong with the conditions, basically that the manager is not an active user. On the right-hand side, we have a list of those audited records. And here we see, for example, that there is something wrong with Andrew Jackson, while Angelo is fully compliant with the model. If I open the audit messages, we see in more detail that Andrew doesn't have a department And because the department is missing, then the department head is also missing. And this example would fail the approval for the department head. We can look at the results from the blueprint's point of view also. And this is very interesting when here we can see that from all the users, there are a few that are missing a manager or that the manager is inactive. So for these 3 users, the line manager approval would fail. So we would need to find a new manager for these. And for these 11 records, the approval would also fail because we are asking the approval from an inactive user record. So maybe that person doesn't work for us anymore. And here we see the missing departments. So if the user doesn't belong to a department, then the department approval would fail. And we have 20 of those. So very concrete results based on a simple blueprint and quite easy to fix before it becomes a problem.
Right. And when you do this on a regular basis, you would be able to catch the people that leave the company without you basically knowing it.
Yeah. And of course, the idea is to run these on a regular basis. And that's where we get to the reporting. So on this overview dashboard, we can narrow it down to the user domain. And then we see the data compliance trend for user data only. We see like how many compliant or non-compliant messages have been generated, how many records have been audited on a weekly basis. So we are currently auditing around 7,000 records per week. And then if we scroll down, we see some of the problem areas related to user data. So this missing manager seems to be the biggest issue. And again, related to the approval workflows would be a big issue. So all these more detailed reports are also based on the blueprint. So you just create the blueprint. And if in the blueprint we check for the department head, then you get this kind of reports if the department head is missing.
Okay, so to sum it up a little bit, so basically what you're doing with Data Content Manager is that you're creating a blueprint, regardless of what the data is. It's user data in this case because we chose the approval workflow. Then with that blueprint, you start running audits against your existing data that you have in your instance, and you get results, detailed results for that individual blueprint and the audit that you ran. You're able to fix those, of course, and then these dashboards give you an overview of everything. And everything happens without scripting or customizations or anything like that. So you only basically draw the blueprint and everything else follows. Is that correct?
That is correct. In many cases, you can use the predefined templates that we provide. So you just fine-tune the template to match with your own requirements. And in this case, we created a simple blueprint from scratch. So that's an easy option as well.
Okay, well, that's cool. And we have the CSDM content pack, for example, available. So if you wanted to take one of those templates, basically create a blueprint out of it, run an audit, and you'll get information on your compliance against CSDM.
Yes. And actually that CSDM content pack also includes templates for foundation data.
Right.
So you might want to check it out. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks, Mikko. I think it clarified a lot. If you're interested in learning more about Data Content Manager, you can find us at datacontentmanager.com. There's a lot of information about different topics related to how to do things with Data Content Manager in relation to CSDM and in relation to CMDB and foundation data and all that. And of course, we're happy to talk to you if you want to learn more about Data Content Manager as a product. So with that said, thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.